Hi everybody, I'm Dennis from Boulder Sounds. Welcome to this walkthrough of our new Roots upright bass sample library for Native Instruments Kontakt. We could have called this library bluegrass bass, rockabilly bass, Americana bass. It covers all sorts of territory. And we were really fortunate to work with Eric Thorin, who is a terrific bass player here in Colorado as well. He's a master of this style. So this style kind of emanated from bass playing before there were drums in the group. So there's a lot of percussive stuff in this style of playing. It's prevalent in rockabilly and Western swing music as well. Music of Bob Wills, this kind of style. So I think it's unique, and let's dive in. Okay, so here we are on the Roots upright bass instrument. There's four instruments. There's the Roots upright bass instrument. There's a bowed instrument, which is kind of, a bonus instrument. There's also a Kncoks instrument, which is the bass just being played as a percussive instrument. And then there's also another instrument called extra FX slides. There's these kind of just short and long effect type slides. So right now we'll be looking at the main instrument. What we're seeing right now is the instrument panel for the main instrument, and basically what we have is a display here off to the left. It'll show you the different articulations you're using, what string you're playing on, what position. This will change in real time as you play. As you can see there, the string display changed as I was playing. If I use some of the slides or whatever, or Kncoks, you can see the articulation is listed there at the bottom. There's a ghost note. Here's some slide positions here. Okay, so that's just a display to show you what's going on. We also have an effects array right here, and this is the flow of the effects in the instrument. We go from pre-EQ, and then we have a compressor. So we have an EQ you can place before the compressor if you wish. Then you can have different compressor choices. After that, we have a post-EQ, which follows the compressor. And then we have a delay. We have reverb, or if you want to use a space IR convolution. So this represents the signal flow. This page is not intended to edit the effects. You can go to the effects panel for that to do that in more detail, but it's nice and convenient just to turn the effects on and off here on the front page. Down below that, we have our drop-down menu, which has our other pages of the instrument. We have front page, which is what we're on. We have a settings page, expressions page, slides page, KeySwitch page, and an about page, which is basically a built-in manual written into Kontakt. Another thing that's important, if you maximize the instrument, right now I'm in minimized mode. If you open this up, you see at the top it says info is highlighted. Make sure it's highlighted. And then if you point at any button or knob in the instrument, down at the bottom of Kontakt, you can see it says delay. The delay button turns the delay on and off, etc. So it's really helpful to have that highlighted if you want to see, what are the details? What's the setting for this compressor? What does this button do, etc. So that's our front page. So let's move on the drop-down menu here to the settings page. And you can see on the settings page, this first column here says default mode, and below it, auto position is turned on. So what is auto position? Well, I'll try to explain that. For the moment, I'm going to turn it off, and I'm going to go back to the main page so you can watch the display. These red key switches down here are string impose buttons. So what that means is you're going to go up one string as far as it was sampled until it runs out of notes that were sampled, and then it will go to the next string. So for example, if I hold down this low C, you can see it says E string impose. So now watch the display as I play from low E. It says I'm on the E string. Still on the E string. I'm up to a B note. C note, still on the E string. C sharp, it changes to the A string. So that's as far as the E string was sampled, a minor sixth from E up to C. We sampled what we felt were the most commonly used positions. So now if I start on the A and I hold down the A string and pose, let's see how far we can get up the A string. So there it changed at F sharp. So again, that was sampled from A up to F natural. What about the D string? So that was up to C sharp, so that was a major seventh. And then the G string will be all the way up. So this is the highest string on the bass. So that was sampled a full octave. So I'll show you on my little bass guitar here just to demonstrate. So basically we've sampled from low E up to C, up to here, on this string, on the A string, up to the F, on the D string, up to the C sharp, and the G string, a full octave. So it's kind of a diagonal position that was sampled because that is the most commonly used sort of pathway, I think, for bass players. Okay, so if I leave auto position off, basically what will happen is this. Maybe I should tell you what a position actually is. It's roughly defined as the space of your four fingers. The 0 position will include the open string plus 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps. So I'll get open E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and then I'll go on to A. That would be 0 position. So if I have auto position turned off, watch what happens here in the string display. So low E tells me I'm playing the E string. You can see there it switches to the A string. Now I'm on the D string. When I get to the G string, it'll stay on the G string all the way up. Okay, so that's kind of like open position and then going up the first string. Now, if I go back to my settings page and I turn auto position on, and then I'll go back to the display so you can take a look at this. With auto position on, what's going to happen is once I exceed that position, and let's say I go up the G string and then I go to the 5th fret, now I'm in a different position. I'm in the 5th position. So what auto position does is it basically follows you around your fingering position in a more logical zone-like position, right? So there's two ways to play a stringed instrument: in one specific zone or up and down a string. And the string impose enables you to go up and down the string whenever you want to. The position allows you to play in a certain area, and that's what these key switches are at the top part of the keyboard. Those are position impose, so they will keep you in that position if you want to stay in that position. Auto position will basically follow you around as, you know, a bass player would typically logically play. So let's take a look at that. So let me turn auto position on. Oh, I did just have it on from before. And so let's see what happens now. So watch the position display. I'm going to jump. 3rd position. Keeping me in 3rd position. Back to open position. Get the idea? So it's if you're not, especially if you're not a fretted instrument player, it kind of does a lot of this work for you. So now let's go back to the settings page and notice below auto position there's a drop down menu which is set to long sustain. If I click on that drop down menu, we have a choice of long sustain, short attack, slap sustain. So we can change the default setting for those blue keys where you're hearing the basic notes of the bass to any of these 3 articulations. We have chosen to have long sustain. If you want to use the short attack, that's fine. So what the short attack is, it's just simply a shorter sample. It has a little more punch to it. It's really good for faster songs. That kind of thing. What it's not good for is if you need a longer note, because what happens is there's a sampled release which triggers on the key release. If you hold down the key longer than the sample, you won't get that release. You'll get a gap and then you'll get a release, which you don't want. So just use it with care. So here's what it sounds like if I hold it down too long. There's no release. So you want to use it within the release time. The release is typically used as a percussive device. I can also, instead of that, choose a slap sustain, where Eric is slapping the instrument. And of course, whatever you choose as a default, you can switch to any of the other articulations using the key switches available, which I'll talk about in a little while. So the next column says mic balance, and there's a knob. So what we did is we used two microphones sampling Eric's bass. We used a Neumann U87 on the lower part of the instrument for a nice big fat warm sound. And up on the fingerboard, we used a Sennheiser small diaphragm microphone. Can't remember the exact model off the top of my head. And that'll pick up a lot more high frequency and fingerboard noises. So this is a balance control. So if I spin this all the way to the left, where it says 100, you're only hearing the U87. Right, for a nice big fat warm sound. If I spin it all the way the other way, you're just hearing the Sennheiser. A lot more high frequency. So you can balance that out any way you wish. And it will always be in the center, though. It's not a panning control. It simply balances out those two signals. If you want to bring that back to its default setting, just Command click on the Mac. I believe it's Control click on the PC. Below that, we have a release volume knob. So the release in this style of playing is very important because it creates a rhythmic effect. So you can balance out how much release sound you want. So here's an obvious release, right? If I want it, that's it's at -3 dB. If I want to bring it a little louder, all the way up to 0. And another thing about these release samples, they're scripted in such a way so that if you play a longer note, the release will be softer because the note is ringing, it's dying away, and then when the bass player does a release, you wouldn't have a really loud release because the note is not that loud. But if the bass player does a very short one and releases, the release will be louder. So you can hear that if I do a short release, or a short note with a quick release, versus letting it ring a long time. You barely hear the release at the end. So it's been scripted in such a way that it's very realistic. Okay, so if we move on to the next column, you see something that says long, short layers. So these long and short layers refer to the long sustain samples and the short attack samples we were talking about before. These are velocity maps, and you can customize them to your own settings. So right now we're dealing with all 3 velocity layers for the long and short attack samples. Right now you only see 2 layers marked because the first layer obviously starts at 0 and then goes all the way up to this number, 76. So it'll be one below that. It'll be 0 through 75. So that would be layer 1. Layer 2 velocity is from 76 up to 101, and then layer 3 is from 101 up to the maximum of 127. But what if I want to change this? Let's say I want layer 2 to occupy a wider velocity range. Then I can just take this and increase from 76. Maybe I'll go up to 95 or so. And you can drag your mouse across the numbers if you prefer. And so what we'll have here now, actually let me take layer 3 and move it way up to 127. So basically we'll only hear layer 3, velocity 3, if we hit at maximum velocity. And then this will go from 96 all the way up to 126. Actually I'll bring this down, so we're mostly hearing layer 2. And if I really slam it, I will get layer 3. So what if I just want to hear layer 1 only? I can just simply choose layer 1. Right, that's the softest tonal layer. This would be layer 2 by itself. A little brighter. And layer 3 is going to be the strongest. Those nice rattly sounds of the bass. What if I just want to work with layers 1 and 2 only? I just use this drop-down menu, and then I can set my velocity map accordingly as to where that second layer of samples will come in. The column next to it, the slap layers, the reason we have a separate column for that is because the slap samples were only recorded in 2 velocity levels, because it just didn't seem that there was that broad of a dynamic range. The same principle applies though. You can use both layers or just layer 1 and layer 2. Do your velocity settings and you've got it set up. You've almost got a different sounding instrument depending on how the velocities are set. Let's move on to the next drop-down menu on the Instrument tab. It's the Expressions page. This is a fairly simple page. Pitch bend column shows you, for your pitch bend wheel, settings for upward and downward. So I have it set to 1 semitone up, 1 semitone down. If you want to turn on the link button and then you move a knob, it mirrors whatever setting you have on the one knob in the other one in the opposite direction. So I like it set personally to 1 semitone. It just sounds most natural. I just use these for very quick little kind of movements into pitches. I don't use it a great deal, but that kind of thing. You know, instead of having to use a slide sample. And if you want to, on the lower knob, you can certainly set that to a positive direction. So you could have pitch bend up to be 1 semitone, pitch bend down to be 2 semitones. The next column is an LFO vibrato. Right now it's set to CC number 1, which is your your modulation wheel. And you can change that with this knob if you want to set it to a different continuous controller. The next knob down is the amount, how much LFO is affecting the pitch. And below that is the frequency, the speed of the LFO. And of course you can assign any of these to a continuous controller on your controller keyboard, control them in real time. The frequency add below that adds more additionally intense LFO modulation beyond a certain movement point of the mod wheel. I believe it's 65, somewhere right in the middle there. So this just adds, this is useful for if you have a long note or even not even that long of a note, and you just want to add a little vibrato to the sample. Right, so that's very useful and expressive. So let's now go down to the next drop-down page, which is the Slides page. Notice here in yellow your key switches. These are your slides, and when I press one of those keys down, you'll notice these various columns will light up. So I'll play low F, notice the half up. So that highlights, letting you know which one you're using. So that is a half-step slide upward to whatever note you are holding on the keyboard. So if I hold down my key switch, I play a C, I get a slide from B to C since that's a half step. And onward down the line, whole step up, half step down, whole step down. The next column are slap slides. So we have regular slides on the left side, slap slides on the right side. Notice here at the top we have a drop-down menu that says round robin on. So we have 2 round robins for the slides. If we only want to use slide round robin number 1 and we want that to trigger every time, we can just choose that with the drop-down menu. You might, for some reason, just prefer that slide sound and you want to get it every single time that you use it in your sequence. But right now I'll leave round robin turned on. The knobs, the speed, so we can change the speed of the slide. So for example, here's the D slide, half step up, and then if I want to increase that speed, I just use that knob, increase it to 200, twice as fast. Right? If I bring that back to its default setting, now sample start, I can use this knob to start partway through the sample. So instead of right at the beginning of the slide, I might go 25% into the slide or whatever. So let's see what that sounds like. Here's 19%. Notice there's a click at the beginning of the sample. Not so good. Why is that? Because it's not hitting at 0 crossing. That's what this knob takes care of. So you just put a little fade on it with the attack. You don't need much, and that'll get rid of the click. So you have a lot of variety in your slides. So as I go down the slides, let's just take a listen to them. Here's whole step up. Here's half step down. Here's whole step down. The next column are the slaps. Okay, that's a slap half step up, slap whole step up, slap whole step down, and sorry, that was half step down, and then whole step down. So a lot of variety there of slides to make music with. So still on the instrument panel, let's move to the next drop-down page, which is the KeySwitch page. So this is a list of all the key switches in the Roots main instrument. And it shows you exactly where each key switch is assigned, but you can customize this. So for example, if I want to change my E string impose assignment to a different location rather than this low C right here, I can just click on that button, and it says learn key switch, and then just play whatever key you want that to go to, and you can see that C has moved down to F. If I want to return it back to where it was, just do that again and go in reverse. You can customize all of these key switches wherever you want to on your keyboard, except you cannot do it within the space of the basic pitched notes. So you can't get in the way of the light blue notes. Those will remain fixed. Other than that, you can move your key switches around wherever you like. So we had talked about how to customize your KeySwitch page, but we haven't really heard all the key switches and what they do and all the articulations. So let me go back to the front page, just show you a couple things here. So if I hold down my D note here, you see that green key lights up, and it says short attack. So you remember how we could set on the settings page, what was the default kind of a sample we use? So right now it's set to long. This key switch will override that. If I want to jump to my short attacks, and then I press it down, then I can use my short attacks. The next key switch will give me slap sustains instead of the regular sustains. So I can just switch between those very easily using those key switches. The next green key is harmonic samples. So that's a nice effect to have. Now if I go up to the purple key switch here, notice it says E ghost note. So these are ghost notes created on the E string. And they do run in a round robin. Next one is ghost notes on the A string. So these are used frequently like preceding a note, like that kind of thing. And each string has a slightly different sonic character, so we have presented them on the D string as well, and the G string. Next one, finger flick. So this is when Eric's playing and he kind of slaps the instrument with two fingers. And you notice it says E finger flick, so that's a flick on the E string. And these are round robin samples. A finger flick, the A string. D finger flick, and G finger flick. So they all have a slightly different quality to them. Next key switch, or articulation, is E and A palm hit. So this is where he's hitting the bass with kind of the palm of his hand. So he plucks a string and kind of rocks the hand back and hits the neck like that. And when he does that, he's actually doing it on two strings. So that's why it says E and A palm hit. So palm is hitting both the E and the A string. The next one is the A and the D palm hit. And there is not one after that because for the D and G, because he never did that. So the palm hit pretty much came to rest on the E and the A, or the A and the D. This next key switch is called release mute. So this is something I requested Bo make for me. It kind of drove him crazy, I think. But I wanted at times to have a louder release sample for rhythmic purposes. But the basic release setting we have is to be used for just a basic release of the string. But if we really need a slightly louder one, what you do is you play your note and then you hit this key, and it's velocity sensitive, so it's louder than the regular release. So if you hit it harder, you're going to get a louder release, and you can control your releases. It's basically a secondary control over the release samples to have a little bit more oomph in the release if you need them. If I do that softly, it responds more softly. So that release mute just simply gives more of a boost to the sound of the release sample. And the moment you play it, the release will cut off the note and you'll hear just the release. Okay? So that's what that is. From the instrument panel, the very last drop-down page we have is the About page. This is just simply a built-in manual into Kontakt for quick reference. You can just scroll through this and it shows you different pages and information correlating to those pages. So that's just a nice quick reference without having to look at a separate PDF. And also don't forget to have your mouse hover over help enabled in Kontakt so you can get information on whatever you need very quickly from right within the instrument. So now I'll move on to the Effects tab. This is pretty straightforward. I won't spend too much time on this. So you click on Effects, and you'll notice we have right now selected, we have the pre-equalizer. What you can do is to select something, you could either use the drop-down menu here, or you could just click on any of these buttons, and it will automatically turn that effect on, and it will change the display to that particular page. But I'm going to go to the pre-EQ as an example. So now we have a drop-down menu. We have a few equalizers to choose from. We have the 1-band, 2-band, and 3-band equalizer, which are basically the same equalizer, just with more features. Or we have something called the solid G EQ. And notice over here, we have a preset menu. So if you click on this menu, you see select presets 1 through 6. We'll have slot 1 filled in with a preset that works right off the bat. The rest of them are for you to fill in whatever way you want to do it. It tells you we're using the pre-equalizer preset up here. You can click on this knob to reset all knobs. If you're tweaking it and you want to get back to the default setting, just click on that, reset all knobs. Once you get a setting you like, you simply save it as a preset. You just click on this button. There's no need to save the instrument. It's already saved to a data file. And that data file is also shared by the other Roots Upright bass Kontakt instruments. So if you get a setting you like for reverb and you want to use it in the Kncoks instrument, the percussive bass instrument, they will share that file. It'll be updated right away. You can work with it. You'll have exactly the same reverb sound. And then you can save the entire bank, or you can load a bank, and you can set a specific bank as a default. I won't go into all the EQ settings. You all, I'm sure, have worked with that plenty. So we have pre-EQ, compression. Now on the compression one, we also have something kind of interesting. This transient control. I'll just show you this very quickly. What the transient control does is you can have it exaggerate the attack with a much punchier attack, or you could have it decrease the attack. The sustain, you could have it increase the sustain somewhat artificially. So if you wanted to get maybe select a, let me turn off that EQ for a moment. Let's say you wanted to get a fretless bass kind of quality to it. Let's see. Let me get back. So what I could do is I could decrease the attack a little bit, and then I might increase the sustain. I'll bring it way up. I'll decrease the attack even more. way down. Not really a fretless sound, but you see what I'm saying? We're decreasing the attack, increasing the sustain. It gives it a very different quality. So that's definitely worth playing with. Everything else you're familiar with, delay settings, reverb, this is Kontakt's built-in reverb, space IR convolutions. We have a drop-down menu with all these choices, ambience, church, chamber, hall, plate, room, reverb, with all sorts of settings. So that's basically your effects section. So now I've loaded the Roots upright bass bowed instrument. This is sort of a bonus instrument. This was not my intention to make a bowed bass, but since we had time in the studio, things were going well, and Eric was accommodating enough to get his bow out, we figured why not. So this is the instrument panel, front page, same principle as the previous main instrument. And the blue keys are our sampled bowed notes. I'll give you a little listen to those. So got a very nice rich sound out of that. So on the main instrument panel we have our same effect array here. And if we go to the next drop-down page, we have the settings panel. If you're familiar with the Bolder Sounds fiddle instrument for Kontakt, you'll be right at home with this because this has a lot of the same scripting as well. Let's take a look at the settings page now of the bowed bass. Left-hand column says default mode. Right now it defaults to monophonic. You can change that to polyphonic if you wish, and play 2 notes at a time, double stops. Below that we have default to long bow strokes. We could also change that to short bow, which are short, kind of punchy bow strokes. And the auto bow will come in if you continue to hold that down and go to the next up or down stroke. And that can be set, the timing can be set differently here for the short bow strokes. And for the long bow strokes, you can set the timing of the auto bow down there. I'll go back to a long bow. Next, it says fingered strings. So what that means is when we get to what could be an open string, we have the default setting to be a fingered string. So when I go to the A, for example, if I go back to my main page, if I go from E to A, notice there in the display it said fingered string. But if I go back to my settings page and change this now to open strings, look at my main display page. When I get to A, it's now using a bowed stroke on an open string. So now on the settings page, we'll move to the next column. It says long bow, and we have control over the attack and the legato connection of various parameters when they overlap. And we have an auto legato script here. So if I want to do a slower attack, for example, on these long bow strokes, which I've defined here in the default mode. So here's what it sounds like at 0. So I can just increase the attack if I want that to be a slower attack. And of course I can control that in real time with continuous controllers if I wish. I can also change the sample start. So I might want to start a little way into the bow stroke. So I'll move this up to around 15%. And we'll most likely get a little bit of a click in the audio here. Not too bad, but so to get rid of that, let me increase that so it's more exaggerated. So I would use my attack, and I would just put a very slight fade on that, and you'll get rid of any of those clicks. So if you use the sample start, just be mindful that you may need to tweak the attack parameter. The next column over is in reference to when two notes overlap and we're in monophonic mode, this is what the attack is going to be like and how it crossfades into the next sample. So it's the same principle on this column as what I just showed you. It just has to do with the second note and the auto bow algorithm and how one note goes into the next note smoothly. The next column over says short bow. So in order to hear this, of course, you would need to be using the short bow strokes. So I can just change this to short bow as a default. These have a little more punchy sound, but of course the sustain is not as long. I can change the bow stroke auto bow time here if I wish. So listen to it change. So if I want that to be shorter, I can just use this knob. Okay. Next column is mic balance. This is the same as the previous main roots upright bass instrument. We can balance between the Neumann all the way on the left, the Sennheiser all the way on the right, or whatever degree in between. And then again, we have control over the release samples there. So 0 dB would be as loud as possible, and if you want to pull back the release a bit, just decrease it with that knob. So that's the settings page. Now let's move on to the expressions page. The first column says velocity. So this is control over velocity modulation of the volume of the samples. And you can set a percentage here. And you can also assign a low pass filter if you wish. Its default is turned off, but if you want to use that filter, try the setting here. When you play more softly on your velocity, it will bring the filter in, which will darken the sound. So you can play with that, see how it works for you. The next column says dynamics. Continuous controller. You can set it to whatever CC you want. And again, you have filter control here. Notice what happens if I click on the CC button. Watch what happens on the pitch bend column next to it. It disappears because now I am using my pitch bend to control dynamics and not pitch bending. Personally, I like to use this a lot because I'm not going to use the pitch bend on a bowed bass anyway, and it's just very expressive, intuitive. So you can control your dynamics through the pitch bend very easily. It works really well for me. The next column is LFO vibrato. This is no different than the plucked instrument. It's very expressive. And you can, make those settings any way that works for you. And now on to the KeySwitch page of the bowed bass. This is no different than the KeySwitch page of the previous instrument. You can customize your key switches and put them wherever you like. And the key switches are listed here. So we have down bow, which imposes a down bow, so you'll always get down bow strokes. Up bow, imposition. Legato, you can impose the legato from note to note, or impose an attack and no legato. This is where we choose open strings for when there's a choice between an open string or a closed string. And articulations in the bowed instrument, the basic articulations are simply short bow and double stops. So you can play this in a polyphonic manner and force it with a key switch. Just remember the auto bow articulation does not work in polyphonic mode. You need to be in monophonic mode for that to work. And again, we have an about page for the bowed instrument, just like we did the plucked instrument. Okay, we're getting there. So 2 more instruments to go through. I'll do them very quickly, hopefully. So now I've loaded up what we call the Kncoks instrument. This is turning the bass into a percussion instrument. So if you look at our display, notice it says right front muted strings. So this group of samples here, the first blue set of samples, these are more muted percussive samples. And notice above it, it says right front. So it's from the bass player's perspective. So it's the right front of the instrument that he's hitting towards the top of the instrument. These are round robin samples. This is called right front. And this is just on the white keys. Right side. Thumb on the right side. Upper left side. And mute open strings. So basically if you hold this, you let it go, the sample continues to ring, especially on these open samples, which I'll show you in a moment. Let me jump to those. So if I just lift the key, it still continues to ring. But if I do not want it to ring, I use this mute open strings key. That'll cut it off. So you have control over the ringing of the percussive nature of those open hits. It could also be used on the closed hits as well. So here's what the open ones sound like. That's right front, open strings. Right side, thumb on the right side, and upper left side. Hits, and that's all there is to it. That's just kind of a cool percussive instrument. You can throw that into your sequences. We have a settings page, which you can turn the round robins on and off if you wish to. There's 4 round robins there. Mic balance, just like the previous instrument. And the about page, just like the other instruments. Okay, let's move on to the FX slide instrument. So now the last instrument is called Roots Upright Bass Extra Slides. I heard Eric playing in the studio, and he was doing these kind of quick, kind of comical sounding slides, and I thought it'd be great to record those. So we have this in a separate instrument. If you take a look at the key switches here in green on this A, you'll notice if I go to A sharp, the display changes from short slides to long slides. So those are the 2 basic varieties we have to choose from. So I'm going to demonstrate short slides. The blue key switches on the left are upward slides. On the right are downward slides. They're not in any particular interval like half steps or whole steps. They're just kind of this quick effect. We couldn't really categorize them. They were so unusual. So if I hold down the first red key switch, we're going to hear slides on the E string. Okay, and downward slides. If I go to the next key switch, these are short slides on the A string. Downward. Next one on the D string. And downward. And the same thing on the G string. Now if I change my key switch to long slides, and then I press my E string key switch, or downward slides, and we can do that for each string. Okay, so you get the idea. Those are kind of fun. And then on the other pages of the instrument, we have our settings page with the same old stuff as before. You can have the default be short slides or long slides. And then the slides page is going to be important, of course, in a slides instrument. You're going to want to change the speed of the slides from time to time, the attack, and so on. We have a KeySwitch page as well, so you can reassign your key switches if you like. And the about page, just like the other instruments. So there it is. That's the Roots Upright Bass Sample Library for Kontakt. Feel free to email me if you have any questions about the library. We had a lot of fun making it. We think it's a real unique library in the selection of sample libraries available today. And best wishes to you from myself and Bo Clausen here at Boulder Sounds. Take care.
Mm-hmm.